Hello and welcome to our last big set of notes. We're going to be looking at 8.3 some more and really focusing on solving percents with proportions. So in this lesson, you are going to use proportions to solve percent problems specifically, and we're going to look at those two ways that we can do that. So building on more of what we just talked about in the last lesson. All right, for your notes, you're going to add on that two equal ratios, which are called a proportion. You can use these proportions to solve for a missing value. We're going to refer to that as x. Remember, the letter x is just a placeholder. It's very similar to a box. It's just representing something we don't know. We can use the proportion to solve in two different ways. I can make the scale factor like equivalent ratios, like we've done before, where I'm multiplying. How many times does this go into this? Or I can cross multiply and divide, like you saw a tiny bit in the last video. So let's go ahead and show some example problems. So in this problem, you might notice that these are not necessarily percent problems, they're just proportion problems. In this first number one, I'm going to use method 1 here instead of method 2. We're going to use method 1 because I can find a scale factor. I know that 9 times 9 is 81. Therefore, I can times 8 by 9 to get my answer of 72. On this next problem, I am going to check again. Can I multiply to get 4 by a whole number to get to 32? Well, I'm going to pull up my calculator really quick so we can check. 32 divided by 4 is 8. Yep, so if I times by 8, I'll get 32. So therefore, 7 times 8 makes my missing piece. 7 times 8 is 56, so that is my answer. Okay. Then in the next problem, I am doing the same thing. Can I turn 20 into 240? We're going to double check just with division on our calculator to make it faster. And yes, it goes in 12 times. So I'm going to times this by 12. And that means I need to figure out what times 12 makes 180. So I'll probably do a little long division here. Okay. To figure out how many times it goes in. So it goes in 1 time, and I have 6 left over. 12 into 60 is 5, and that's even. So it's going to be 15 is my answer. Now, on all of these problems, if I wanted to do the second method here and cross multiply and divide, I would just multiply diagonally. And then so I'm going to multiply diagonally the two numbers that are there, and then I'm dividing by the third number. So I'm going to end up doing 8 times 81 divided by 9, and that's also going to get me 72. Okay, in this problem, I'm going to multiply the two numbers that are diagonal and then divide by the third one. So 7 times 32 divided by 4. And then in this way, I would again multiply the two numbers that are diagonal, 20 times 180, and then divide by 240. And that's going to get me 15. So that is showing the two different ways in our proportions. And we're going to use either way in our methods, but know that if the best time to use the cross multiply and divide instead of scale factor is if it doesn't go in evenly, then you would want to use that method too. But really, you could use method 2 for anything, even if it does go in evenly. All right, so now we're going to use proportions to find percents. So a percent is a part to whole ratio, as we've talked about before, where the whole is always 100. Each percent can be modeled on a 10 by 10 grid, which can also be written as a ratio. And you can use a proportion to solve problems where you have your part over whole equals percent over 100. So this is the same ratio that we used in our last lesson. It's just flip-flopped. Part and whole on the right instead on the left. Okay, so here they're showing the part and whole. They're using a tape diagram in this model right here. to show where the part is, the percent, and the whole. And then this is where you're getting. So this is where you're getting all of the pieces. Okay. And that's how they're getting their ratio proportion set up here so that they can solve the answer. Okay. Okay, so let's practice here. So here they're using a tape diagram so that we can find our part, our percent, and our whole easily. So here in our number 4, we know that 30 is our part, X would be our whole, and 20 is our percent. And then of course we're going to keep the 100. Okay, so this becomes 20. Then we've got our part of 30, and then we're missing this piece here. So we're actually going to use that X to get us used to using an X. So I'm going to put X. Okay, in order to solve this proportionally, or sorry, with the method that we have, because 30 cannot go into 20 evenly, and 20 can't go into 30 evenly, we're going to do the cross multiply and divide. So we're going to cross multiply 30 times 100 and then divide by that leftover number of 20. So I'm going to end up getting 3,000 divided by 20. That's the same as 300 divided by 2, which is 150. So our answer here, the whole, is 150. Okay, over here, again, this is our part, this is our whole, and then we've got our percent and our 100, setting up a proportion to solve. 48, 25, and 100. So again, because 48 doesn't go into 100 quite evenly, it's not easily in my head, I'm going to multiply and then divide. So we're going to do 48 times 25 and then divide by 100. Okay, so I'm going to have to do 48 times 25. I'm going to use a calculator for time here. So that's 1,000. 200, and then divide by 100. So that's going to get rid of those zeros, and my answer is going to be 12. There you go. All right, these next problems is just you practicing setting up proportions, just like we did the other day, with that understanding that if it does not go in evenly, like with using our scale factor, like they did on numbers 1, 2, and 3, that we have that second method of cross multiplying and dividing if needed. So I'm going to leave this on. Go ahead and pause the video and solve the problems, and then join me in a little bit to see if you are correct. All right, here are our answers. So first one is a percent that's missing, and we can easily multiply it across using scale factor. All of the other ones I ended up using are cross multiply and divide because they did not go into each other very easily. Now, you could always divide and find a decimal answer, and that would work. You know, you could do, on the calculator here, you could do 100 divided by 60 and know, 60 divided by 100, which is 0.6, and then multiply by 0.6 here. But again, that just gets a little tricky. So if you cross multiply and divide, then you're going to get your answer pretty easily. So you can see all of our answers here. Notice that on number 11, our percent is not a whole number, and that is okay. You're not always going to get a whole number. Sometimes you'll get decimals, okay? All right, the last thing we're going to practice here is just a couple of these word problems on our questions here, still using proportions. So on this first question, it asks what percent is equivalent to the shaded portion below. Now this should look really familiar, except that this grid is not a 10 by 10. We have a 4 by 4, which means that our total squares is 16. We are still going to try to make it out of 100, and we are trying to find a percent. Now our shaded, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, and again, 16 doesn't go into 100 evenly, so I'm going to multiply and divide. We're going to do 6 times 100 divided by 16. That's going to get me 600 divided by 16. I'm going to use a calculator for ease right now. 600 divided by 16. And I'm going to get 35. Wait, was that 35? 37.5%. Okay, I can do that with long division as well, very easily. Okay. The next one says, determine if the answer to the problem below is 24. Explain your reasoning. So we want to know if this part, this number, is at 24. One way that we can do that is through the cross multiplying process. So we know that the part is 18. We think the whole number is 24, but we're not sure. And then our percent is 75. So I could do the same thing I did on number 12 and then actually find the correct number and then compare and see if it's the same. But the other thing I could do is just cross multiply everything and see if they are equal to each other. So I'm going to do 18 times 100 and see, does that equal 75 times 24? So 18 times 100 is 1800, and 75 times 24 is going to be 1800. So yes, 24 is right. Okay, check. All right, the last one says, Euro solved the problem, what is 7% of 150 by setting up this percent problem right here. This proportion. What mistake did he make and solve it correctly? Well, if you remember, we are trying to put our part on top, our whole on the bottom, and then our percent over here above the 100. In our problem, 7 is our percent. So what he should have done was x over the 150 and 7 over 100. Then he could solve the problem correctly. Okay, we're going to do 150 times 7. $1,550. And then we're going to divide that by 100. That's going to get me 10.50 as my answer. All right, and that is solving problems, solving percents using a proportion. Let me know if you have any questions, and good luck.